And let's put our hands together to welcome our speaker for this evening, Dr. Nick Sutton.
Thank you very much. I must remember to speak into the microphone all evening. I sometimes get a little carried away and start using the full stage, but I've got to remember to speak into the microphone for this time. Yes, subject for this evening is what do Hindus believe about God, which may be a very obvious subject to ask of a religion. It may be, I'm sure it is, something that you've been asked yourself at different times. I don't know, over the garden fence or something. You know, a neighbour might say, "So what do you Hindus believe about God?" I don't think it's always the easiest question to answer. And I was speaking to someone a few days ago, a young person, and he was saying that very often at school or college and places, young Hindus get asked that question. They get probed and pushed and sometimes criticised by outsiders and members of evangelical faiths who want to make converts. Criticisms, well, you Hindus worship a load of gods. You Hindus worship odd gods. You Hindus worship idols. And he was saying, we really don't know how to respond to that. When you come to think of it, we're not really sure what Hinduism says about God. Is there a simple way in which that matter can be explained? Is there a simple way in which Hindu theology can be outlined? And that's why I'm here, I suppose, to answer that question. Is there a simple way in which Hindu theology can be explained? And the answer is no, there isn't a simple way in which Hindu theology can be explained. And primarily, and I'm going to come back to this point repeatedly, Hinduism is not a religion like other religions, inasmuch as it's not based on a central doctrine, a central theme, or a central idea. And if we look at the other religions of the world, although there is obviously diversity amongst them, as we have in Christianity, we've got Roman Catholics, Orthodox, and various groups of Protestants. In Islam, we have Sunni, Shia, Ismailis, etc. Still, there is a core doctrine, a core statement, a core text, or a central individual who provides a focus for the different strands of the tradition. Now, Hinduism doesn't really have that. And many people might think, well, this is what Hinduism needs. We need to be united together under a single banner, to one doctrine, one idea, one statement of what Hinduism is. Which might be nice. But on the other hand, what I'm going to suggest ultimately, I don't want to put the conclusion first, although it's sometimes advisable. What I'm going to argue is that the fact that Hinduism doesn't have a single core doctrine that everybody is obliged to sign up to is in fact a great strength of the tradition. It's the beauty and glory of the Hindu tradition that it doesn't demand of any individual that they have to subscribe to a particular doctrine. So that's the conclusion I'm going to be working towards, and I'm going to try and explain why I think that is the case. First of all, I suppose the question has to be raised, do Hindus believe in God? Yes. Is the answer? Everyone says yes? Are there any Hindus who don't believe in God? Yes. We've got any names for them? I don't want names and addresses, but are there any... so we can go around and push a leaflet through their door. But, I mean, are there any Hindu groups or Hindu ideas, Hindu ideologies, which don't include a notion of God? Who's that, Ravi? Jains. Yes, are Jains Hindus? Somebody asked me that when I was in London the other day. Am I a Hindu? Grey area. They're sort of half in, half out. It's interesting, actually. I've got this book here, which I purchased in India last year, 500 rupees, so I pushed the boat out a bit on that one. It's a book written, I think, about 1400 AD. It's called the Sarvadarshana Sangraha, which means the collection of all philosophies of that time. And it's an interesting book because he arranges them in order of goodness, really, with the worst at the bottom and the best at the end, according to his own idea. I like the bottom one. Actually, we're talking about football and Leicester City and bottom of the table and those sort of things. Sorry, that didn't go down very well, did it? Mid-table, yes. Okay, that's sort of elite group, isn't it? Now, who's going to be at the bottom in Madhvacharya's estimation? Sorry? Well, he is a Vedantist himself. He is an Advaitin himself, so he's putting his own group at the top, obviously, Shankaracharya. Oh, his name is Madhav Acharya, not Madhvacharya. Sorry, I should have clarified. Well, yes, in that case he would. Yes, I don't know what I'm... Actually, the group he puts at the bottom... Yes, the Charvaks, yes, our old friends, the Charvaks. A lot of them about, actually. The Charvaks are interesting groups, and they do fall under the heading of Hindu ideology. And I was reading through this first chapter, and strangely finding myself persuaded by the Charvaka ideology. Basically, Charvaka, they're also called Lokayats, which means their whole ideology is focused on the world. And essentially, what Charvak taught was there are no gods, there's no afterlife, there's no karma, there's no other world, there's nothing but the here and now, and therefore the goal of life is, I don't know if he actually said this, but I've heard it said, eat food cooked in ghee was supposedly his ideology. In other words, enjoy the world because there's nothing else, which is why I say there's a lot of Charvaks around, so even though they don't know what they are. But yeah, so he's an atheist. In Western terms, he would be described as an Epicurean. Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, had the same idea. They used to put on their gravestones, I was not, I was, I am not, I care not. In other words, before I was born, I was not, then I was for a bit, and now I am not, and I don't care. That's the world, and that's you've got to get on with it. There's no point bewailing the fact. So that's Charvak's view. Now, okay, and obviously the Charvaks didn't believe in any god. They didn't believe that the world was created. They believed that it just occurred as a natural combination of matter. I suppose I don't know if he really goes into the science of the world. Who is he going to put above the Charvaks? A bit better than the Charvaks, but not very much better. And remember, he's talking about all Indian philosophy here, all Indian theology. Sorry? Sankhya. Yes, he does have Sankhya, I think. But he quite likes Sankhya, actually. And he's got Sankhya quite high up. In fact, it's almost below. It's the last one, but the Advaita. Well, it's Sankhya and Yoga, which he calls the Patanjali Darshan. But in fact, the ones he's got just above the out-and-out atheists are, and little better than atheists in his view, are Buddhists. He's not keen on Buddhists at all. And slightly above the Buddhists, he's got the Arhatas. Anybody know who the Arhatas might be? We've already had them mentioned there. They're the Jains. And the reason, again, neither of these philosophical religious systems, Buddhism or Jainism, has a concept of God within them. There is no God. There is no Jain God. There is no Buddhist God. Likewise, you mentioned the Sankhya system, which is today quite an obscure system of Indian philosophy. But what does the Sankhya system say about God? Yes, Yes, they're different. But what about Ishwar? No, exactly. No real concept. It's not avowedly atheistic, but it's entirely uninterested in the notion of God. It's a religious system, but God doesn't have a place within it. The idea is, what the Sankhya is saying is that the highest realization is just to know yourself. And Patanjali, of course, who is the yoga acharya, he's associated with that to a certain extent, although he does accept the existence of Ishwar. But what he's saying basically there is that there is the self, the soul, the Atman or Purush, which is entirely transcendent, which is untouched by matter, and then there's Prakriti, the material embodiment. And the goal of the spiritual quest, if you like, is to realize your own spiritual identity, to realize that you are Purush, and that highest knowledge, which can be achieved by yoga practice, then yields liberation from rebirth. Now, in that idea, there is no mention of God. And in other words, and I think that's significant, because in theistic ways of thinking, the highest goal of life is always achieved as a blessing from God. So in theistic Hinduism, in Christianity, and in Islam, etc., if you're going to get into the blissful afterlife, it's done because God bestows grace upon you, as the Christians often say. I remember in the churches, they would have posters outside that says, Jesus saves. The Bhagavad Gita says, Krishna saves. Well, it doesn't say that. He said, Krishna is speaking. So he says, I save. I will save you. So essentially there, the process of religion is worship of God, is to build up a loving relationship with God. And as a part of that reciprocal loving relationship, God, the supreme deity, who is eternally in the higher position, he will reach down and lift up the soul from its imprisonment within matter and grant moksha, liberation from rebirth. Where in the Hindu scriptures will we find that idea? That God saying, I will save my devotees. In the Bhagavad Gita, exactly right. Krishna is very clear on that point. He says, we've spoken about this before, I think. Last time I was here, I was talking about, I think my talk was called All About Krishna. And I was mentioning there, Krishna says then, Yomad bhaktaha same priyaha, that one who is my devotee, he is also beloved of me. He says, Aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishami. I will save you. Aham tvam. I will moksha ishami. I will grant you moksha from all papa. I will deliver you. And again he says, Teshamaham samudharta mrityu sangsara sagarat. For the persons who are devoted to me, I am the deliverer. I am the savior from the ocean of birth, of death and rebirth. So Krishna then is saying quite clearly, I will save you. And in the Vaishnava theological systems, people like Ramanuj, Madhvacharya, Vallabhacharya, etc., make it very clear that Krishna will save the devotee because he loves the devotee. Because he loves the devotee. And as an expression of love, he will deliver him. Ramanuj uses the example of a father. If a father sees a child in a dangerous or distressful position, or a mother, I think it applies equally to parents, he will immediately come and lift them out and say, come away. The child doesn't, if the child's stuck down in the pit, he doesn't have to rely on his own little arms and legs. The parents will come and say, let's get you out of there and drag them out. So in that way. And I was recalling many, many years ago now, showing my age, but I remember I was at Bhaktivedanta Manor. I'm sure some of you have been there, the centre of the Hare Krishna movement, when the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, Swami Prabhupada, was visiting, and there was an assembly like this, and people were asking him questions. So it was quite, I was quite struck, actually. A very good sense of humour, for one thing, which he had a very good set of one-liners. But apart from that, one man asked him, Swamiji, how can I get moksha? How can I get deliverance from rebirth? And I don't know if anybody ever saw Swami Prabhupada speak, but he wasn't particularly tall. He was quite... You saw him, did you, Raj? Yes. He had a very strong Bengali accent, didn't he? And he had this habit of pausing for a long time before speaking so he could think of the answer. So he stopped, he listened to the question, how can I get moksha? And he went, actually, he said, the main thing is that Krishna likes you. That's what he said. Main thing is Krishna likes you. And then the man asked, thank you, Swamiji, how do I get Krishna to like me? And he said, actually, he said, that's Krishna's business. He said. So what he's saying is that in that system, it's all about Krishna liking you. And it's very much, it's building on the theological ideas of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna just chooses who he likes. And he doesn't want a lot of, he's in his eternal abode. He doesn't want a lot of miserable people up there with him, does he? He doesn't want horrible people. If you were choosing who you're going to spend a long time, you wouldn't pick out, well, you know who I mean. You wouldn't pick out Hitler, would you, or anyone like that, and say, come. Because, you don't want to have Hitler knocking around. So, in other words, it's not necessarily about hard and fast rules. There's not a clear definition of who will be chosen and who will not. It's the ones that Krishna cleaves to, who Krishna likes. Very much a doctrine of divine grace. Now, if I was to go back to what I was talking about earlier, to other systems of Hindu thought, in the Sankhya system, I'm even going to say in the Patanjali Yoga system as well, in Shankaracharya's Advaita system, in all of those systems, I've said that where God is worshipped, then the will of God is the key to liberation. But in Sankhya, in Yoga, in Shankaracharya's Advaita, what's the key to getting moksha? Who's going to give you the moksha? How does one get moksha? Sorry? You've got to do it yourself. Yes. What would be the key word, Prafulla, there? What's the word that is the key? Just one word. Yeah, what I was thinking of was jnana, knowledge. That is it. And what is the knowledge of? What knowledge is it that brings moksha? It's knowledge of the Atman, and Atman is self, and it's also Brahman. So in Shankaracharya's system of thought, moksha doesn't come as a result of some deity looking down on you and feeling inclined towards you and thereby lifting you up and granting you moksha as a gift. It becomes through your own work alone, if you like. You transform yourself from a conditioned being of this world who's existing in the here and now, who's undergoing rebirth, who's in a state of avidya or illusion, into a living being who is filled with higher knowledge, and that jnana, that knowledge, then elevates you to the place of moksha. So there's a fundamental difference there in the different forms of Indian thought, even within the Hindu tradition. Buddhism, Jainism likewise, for the Buddhist, at least for the Theravada Buddhist, then nirvana is achieved by enlightened knowledge. The Buddha himself started out as an unenlightened being when he was living in as the prince of the Shakya tribe, and sitting down under a Bodhi tree, he transformed himself from an ordinary human being into a Buddha by the achievement of enlightened knowledge. Nobody came down from a higher world and touched him and blessed him and raised him up and said, now you will be a Buddha. It was his own achievement. Similarly with Shankaracharya, his teaching is always meditate upon the Upanishads. Think about the highest Mahavakyas of the Upanishads, such as Tat Tvam Asi, you are that, or Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Realize that you're not this temporal identity, but you are the absolute supreme self. And when that knowledge becomes imbued within your being, within your consciousness, then you are transformed from a conditioned being into an enlightened being. But the point there is that there is no deity who's doing it for you. There's no one else to pray to who's going to come down and save you, because you yourself are the highest truth. So what I'm working towards within Hindu theology, and we could probably include the Jains and the Buddhists in that as well, there is a clear division of perspective there between those who talk about pursuing a form of spirituality which is about self-knowledge, self-realization, and those who pursue a devotional ideology, looking for an external deity, worshipping him, entering into a relationship of love, and thereby invoking the mercy and grace of that deity. So when our friends ask us, what do Hindus believe about God? We've already got two very different concepts of what God might be, and one might even say two irreconcilable concepts. Clearly, Sankhya has no interest in God. It's about knowing your true self. Yoga pays lip service to the existence of God. Patanjali mentions Ishwar, but ultimately in the realization that comes through yoga, again, it's about you doing it yourself, you mastering the mind. But what about Shankaracharya in the Advaita system? Does Shankaracharya teach about God? Is he a believer in God? You're saying he is? Okay. Which is maybe. What sort of, Kruno, you're nodding then, what sort of God does Shankaracharya give us?
Well, three types. The main ultimate being Brahman.
Okay.
And then you've got Ishwar for the sustenance of the world, and then Bhagwan on the past.
Okay. All right. So different levels of Ishwar. But I remember years ago, and I've known you for quite a long time, even when you were just a young fellow, you used to have a T-shirt, I think, didn't you? Said, I used to be an atheist until I discovered I was God. I don't know if you still got that. But now you don't wear it out of humility. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. And that's, and in a sense, that's although it's a slightly flippant remark. I used to be an atheist until I realized that I was God. Does Hindu teaching really say that? That I, you, any one of us are God? Am I God? Thank you. Is anybody going to say I'm not God? Yeah. Just the Irishman. Anyone else going to say that I'm not? So how is that? How can I be God? You don't know what I'm like when I'm at home. Shankaracharya is saying ultimately that the highest reality is Brahman, and that the individual self, your own Atman, your soul, is exactly identical with Brahman. You yourself are the highest form of divinity. And in a sense, what he's saying is, don't look upwards to some heavenly domain in which there is a God looking down on us in a sort of anthropomorphic manner, but the absolute divine reality is contained within your own being. Even in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one of the foundational texts of Hinduism, I think it's Yajnavalkya says, what's the point of worshipping? Who are you worshipping? You yourself are the absolute reality. And if you worship a deity of any kind, then that implies duality. You're thinking there is something apart from Brahman, and there isn't. You yourself are the absolute reality. Now, the question then, of course, Shankaracharya's thought is rather more subtle than that, and I don't want to oversimplify, but at the same time, I don't want to go into too much detail about his thought. And he does accept that there are, just a small point, bear with me, this gets a bit too long, that there are different levels of reality. And the level of reality that we exist in now is not unreal, but it's not absolutely real. It's usually described as being a contingent reality. It's not unreal, but it's not the ultimate reality. Beyond this reality is the reality that is Brahman. And when we transcend this reality and realize Brahman, then this reality ceases to exist for us. I suppose the best way I've found to explain what he seems to be saying is, it's like a dream reality. When you're within a dream, everything that happens to you is very, very real. I'm sure I've already experienced that. You, I don't know, you dream that I don't know, Burnley have won the FA Cup or something like that, and whilst you're in that dream, it's absolutely real, and you're celebrating, and your heart swells with joy. Or mine would, obviously, not you. But and then you wake up and you think, oh, it was only a dream. Or a paradox. The other side is something terrible happens to you. You've lost something, or you've done something, or you've said something deeply offensive, or had a road accident or something like that, and you're stuffing stress and anxiety. But then you wake up. You must have had that experience. You think, that was just a dream, wasn't it? And suddenly all the suffering that you were going through drains away from you. I think that's what Shankara is saying about this world. Whilst we're in this world and living it, then all the experiences we have are real. But when we go to the higher level of consciousness, then we realize that it was just a contingent reality. It wasn't that it was unreal, because it was real in that sense. But now we've transcended that level of reality. It no longer has that reality to it. Okay, that's just a very brief and rather gross oversimplification of Shankaracharya's very complex system. But the point I'm making is that ultimately what Shankaracharya is saying is that the highest reality, Brahman, I'm not sure that, and that Brahman counts as God in this sense. The word God is usually applied to a sentient being, and that sentient being exists in a higher world than the world we inhabit. Moreover, he is responsive to our needs, our prayers, and our deeds. So typically in monotheistic forms of religion of all types, Indian and Western, God will respond favorably to worship and prayer. If I pray to him, I hope he should bless me. I was always taught as a small boy that if I wanted something, I needed something, I should always pray. So I always have a long list of things to pray for, passing 11 plus and things like that. Anything that's bad, I pray, please God, please help me. I don't know if that was theologically sound or not. I don't know if God ever heard. Sorry? No, I did it all myself. I'm not giving anyone else the credit for passing my 11 plus. I don't know. We don't know, do we? I mean, maybe if I hadn't prayed, then maybe he would have put my name off the list. But there is that idea, isn't there, that there is sort of blessing and prayer, and people talk about God is angry with me, or God has been merciful towards me, God has done this towards me. And it's this idea that there is a divine being existing on a higher level who has some sort of almost human emotions. Sometimes he's angry, sometimes he's merciful, etc. And then he acts and interferes. He's active in the world. He controls the events of the world, so that history then becomes incorporated into religion. People talk about sometimes Olympic athletes win a gold medal, and they'll say, by the grace of God, I was able to do this, as if God somehow had decided who would win the gold medal, and he sort of pointed the finger and said, you're going to win. Or something like that. He was controlling the outcome of events. And I think that's a gross oversimplification, but there is that idea of a sentient being active in the world. Now, what Shankaracharya is saying is that there is such a being, but he is not the ultimate reality. He exists and operates only in the level of the contingent reality. The ultimate reality is just the absolute spirit, Brahman. And Brahman is not a being, not an entity, not something or someone that you can pray to and is active in the world. It is just the ultimate, changeless, absolute reality. So in a sense, we can say that Brahman is God, if we're using the broadest definition of that term. But in terms of what people usually mean by the word God, the Brahman that Shankaracharya offers and the Brahman that the Upanishads for the most part speak of isn't that kind of sentient being. It's not an active, personal being. Even the word Brahman in Sanskrit declines in the neuter. It's not a masculine noun, it's a neuter noun, suggesting again it is an absolute reality, but not a personal reality. Okay, so I think, if you like, we can look at Indian religious thought and we can take shades of opinion. Some who don't even have God, and then shading a little bit more towards theism, we have Shankaracharya, who has an idea of God, but not so much of a personal sentient being. But of course, Hinduism doesn't just have Shankaracharya. It also has very developed forms of theistic ideology in which God is very, very personal. And here I'm thinking of devotees of Krishna, devotees of Shiva. In their religious system, the God is intensely personal. Krishna is intensely personal. He interacts with his devotees in a highly personal manner, as Swami Prabhupada was expressing. He enters into reciprocal relationships. It's there in those words of the Bhagavad Gita, Yomad Bhaktaha Same Priyaha. He says, Me Priyaha, my Priya, my beloved. Just as I might speak to my wife or my girlfriend, I would say, you are my Priyaha, Same Priyaha. You are my beloved. So that's what Krishna says about his devotee. This is, I think, really quite different to the Upanishadic notion of Brahman. This is most definitely a personal being, a being who has feelings and is able to interact with the devotees. And now there are different, I suppose, schools of thought within Hinduism. Some would regard... Who is the Hindu deity, by the way? Is it Krishna? Sorry? Shiva, says the man here. Any other offers? We've had Krishna. Okay, let's not... We don't want any sort of religious violence breaking out. Yes, indeed. Exactly so. Well, let's take up that point then. I mean, the gentleman here said that there are other gods. There's Krishna, there's Shiva, anybody? Ganesh, Hanuman, Ram. Yes, anybody else? We don't leave anyone out, give offense, particularly. Durga, yes, Devi, the goddess, very popular in Bengal, of course. Have we got any? Sorry? Murugan, yes, for the Tamils we have Murugan, and many others as well, and these getting down to sort of the levels, you might say, lesser gods, or I don't know if that's quite appropriate, but there would also be Yakshas, the Jains, for all their high philosophy. When you actually meet them and find out what they're doing, they're worshipping Yakshas. Anybody know what Yakshas are? Or they're sort of water and tree spirits there. In the temple near where I go stay in Kerala, they worship a Brahma Rakshasa. Yeah, anybody know what a Brahma Rakshasa is? I think it's an evil spirit or a ghost, although I find it difficult to interrogate the priest. I've questioned him on it a number of times, but my lack of Malayalam inhibits, but I'm trying to get an interpreter. But he was definitely quite clear that in this temple we worship, I think it's Ayupan, the Keralan god, and we worship a Brahma Rakshasa who lives in the tree. Or some of you might be aware of Shitala. Did we come across Shitala? Shitala is for smallpox, or, as my dentist told me, also for chickenpox and German measles. I did say to her, I said, she said we have to protect our children from these. I said, well, don't you get the MMR jab? And she said, yes, of course, I'm a responsible parent. And she said, it's belt and braces, she said. So that you've got to... that gives the impression, and we've named a few, and our listing has been by no means exhaustive. We haven't mentioned any of the Vedic gods as well. You know, the hymns of the Rig Veda don't mention these gods generally. What gods are in the Rig Veda? Indra, Agni, Varuna, Soma, yes, etc. Prithvi. Jauspati, etc. So there's another range of gods as well. Now we've gone from Hindus who don't really believe in any god to Hindus who believe in a whole host of gods. So in a sense you've got non-theistic Hindus, you've got polytheistic Hindus, and I think you've probably also got some monotheistic Hindus as well. So let's try and, if we can, make sense of this. Let's go to the polytheistic ones. Someone mentioned Hanuman and Ganesh. Are Hanuman and Ganesh the supreme deity? Are they the creators of the world? So are they God in that sense? Be careful, we don't want to give offense here. Demigods. What does that mean, the phrase demigod? The word demigod, sorry, it's not a phrase. What does demigod mean? I suppose the definition, the difference would be, are they transcendent to the world or are they within the world? Sorry? They're transcendent. They're not subject to any of the strictures of material existence. In the sense that they are liberated beings? Are they divine beings who can offer moksha to their devotees? Yes? Are they the absolute God then? Is Ganesh the supreme God? No. What's the difference then between Ganesh and the supreme God? Sorry. Yes, he removes obstacles, but in this world, isn't it, primarily? Yes, okay, he can help you, but who would be, can we name a deity who would be in the category of the supreme God? Krishna. Shiva, again. Any others? Vishnu. Okay, what about Devi? Yep, okay, right. So what's the difference between, shall we say, Shiva and Ganesh in terms of theology? Father and son, yes.
One's premiership, the other's championship.
Well, there's a good point. Let's take this footballing metaphor further. Because in the sense, can the god become promoted to the premiership? Is it possible for the demigod to become the supreme god? Or is there an absolute divide between them?
I think you have the absolute God, Brahman.
Yeah.
And all the other gods have been allocated certain tasks to rule the world, to rule the
Yeah.
universe, and basically everything around it.
I think that's right. Absolutely right. And the word that you use there, allocated, is highly indicative because it implies that they are acting on behalf of someone else. So if I allocate someone to something to someone, then I'm in control and I'm doing the allocation. So you can have this, you can have this, you can have that. But it's down to me that they are given that role. And I think the point would be that within this world, within this created world, there are levels of beings according to the Hindu teaching. There are lower beings than humanity, and there are higher beings than humanity. Whole range of higher beings of different levels and statuses. And the highest beings of this world would be gods such as Ganesh and Hanuman, who are immensely powerful and immensely equipped both materially and spiritually, but still are not in the same status as the absolute deity. And Hanuman reveals this very well, isn't he? Whenever you see Hanuman in the iconography, he's always doing some act of devotion to the supreme deity, to Ram. And in fact, there's a very well-known picture, isn't there, where he opens his heart and shows that Ram and Sita are engraved upon his heart. So in fact, Hanuman's glory and his greatness is that he is a devotee of God, a powerful, qualified devotee, but not the supreme God himself. So I think if we can... Yes, sir, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And how do we interpret that? Did everyone hear what it says? He said that in the Virat, in chapter 11 of the Gita, it's shown that all the gods are within the body of Krishna. I think Arjuna, it's the first thing Arjuna says, Pashami Devan Tavadeva Dehe. Oh Lord, I see all the gods in your body. So how do we interpret that? They are a part of the supreme reality. Uh-huh. Okay, so he includes all the deities within himself. However, that's true. But if we take the verse a little bit further on what Arjuna says, he says, Pashami devangs tava deva dehe sarvangs tata bhuta visesha sangan. It's not just the gods that he sees within the body of Krishna, it's bhuta visesha sangan, the host of all living beings. We're all part of Krishna's body. So it's not just the gods, but it does imply again that the gods are a part of Krishna just as we are part of Krishna, and that means they are within the created world and not above it. And it's very interesting. I think that in that vision of the Vishvarup, even Brahma is mentioned. Brahmanamisham Kamalasanastam. Brahma is also in the Virat Rup, seated on the lotus. But who does Krishna not mention? Which I always think is very interesting. Who's not there in the Virat? One deity, well, there's a few that he doesn't mention. Particularly, he doesn't mention Shiva. Now, some commentaries and translations include Shiva in it, but I think that would be questionable. Shiva is not included within the Virat Rup, which implies that Shiva is above and beyond the world. What I'm going to come back to now is that the Hindu polytheism is not incompatible with Hindu monotheism, inasmuch as that they can have a belief system of there being one supreme God, who in the Gita's terms is Krishna, and then below that one supreme God are secondary or demigods. They are still divinities, if you like, but they are not, their existence does not challenge the monotheism of the Gita. Krishna accepts that there are many gods who can be worshipped. He says it in chapter 7 and chapter 9. But that doesn't rule out his statement that he is the one supreme God. The Bhagavad Gita makes a number of very clear monotheistic statements. Krishna says, Mattaha parataram na anyat. Higher than me, there is nothing. It's a clear statement. There is one principle, one being, one divinity who stands above all others, and that is Krishna himself. But at the same time, Krishna is entirely willing to accept, in fact, he includes it in his teaching, the existence of other lesser gods. So in that way, for the Hindu revelation, monotheism and polytheism are not alternatives, but they are reconciled. They are kept within the same system. Now then, what about the Trimurti? Shiva and Brahma, as well as Vishnu, who is Krishna. Is Shiva God as well as Krishna? Is he a rival god? Are they sort of up against each other? Shiva Shakti, yes. I mean, where does Vishnu fit into that? Where does Krishna fit into that? Yes. Which Ramayan? Tulsidas Ramayan, yes. Okay, not Valmiki doesn't say that, no. So Tulsidas claims that Shiva is a devotee of Vishnu. Greatest devotee, okay? And I think other Bhagavat Puran makes the same point as well. What perspective are those texts written from? Yeah, but what sort of bhakti? Yeah, Ram Bhakti or Vaishnava. They're written by Vaishnavas. So what's the Vaishnava point of view? If we might probably got a few Vaishnavas here. If one asks Vaishnavas, is Shiva also the supreme deity? What will they say? They'll say no, he's not. They'll say he's the greatest devotee of Vishnu, greatest devotee of Krishna, but he's not the supreme deity. He's secondary. Now then, yes, sir.
Can I
Yeah.
Just for a second, then why did Ram in Valmiki Ramayana, Tulsidas Ramayana, pray to Shiv at Rameshwar?
Good question, and the answer to that would be, again, from Tulsidas's perspective.
It's a reciprocal. They had a reciprocal relationship, Shiv and Vishnu.
Okay, I think from...
As far as I see it, but I don't know.
I think that they would say that Ram was acting the role of the perfect man, and in order, his main role of his descent was to set an example for other human beings. So he was setting the example of worshipping Shiva, but he was never accepting any sort of subordination to Shiva from the Vaishnava perspective. I think for virtually all of the Vaishnava Sampradayas and their teachings, they will say, if you ask them, that Shiva is not on the same status as Vishnu. Similarly, in the literature like the Vishnu Puran, Bhagavat Puran, it makes it clear that Shiva is subordinate to Vishnu.
But in some cases, it's been shown that, or I don't know whether it's scripturally correct or not, that there is a Mahavishnu,
Mm-hmm.
which these three, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv,
Mm.
are born from.
Yep.
From their belly button.
Yeah, navel. Yeah.
And then the rest of the cast is all laid out.
Yes, but even implicit in that statement, which you're right to say, is the Mahavishnu is the supreme deity. Now, for example, on the other hand, if you were to get the Shiva Puran, you'll see that there's a Mahashiva, or Sadashiva, as he's known, from whom Vishnu, Rudra, and Brahma appear, but the ultimate deity is Shiva. I think what we've got here, and I don't want to get into too much detail, I think we've got... Does anybody want to suggest any solutions for that? Yes, Praful.
It's very complicated. There isn't a one who is superior to another. Like if you look at our funeral,
Mm-hmm.
start by saying Ram Nam Satya Hai. So as you're carrying the body, you're saying Ram's name.
Mm-hmm.
Then we read the 15th Adhyay from the Gita,
Mhm.
which glorifies Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end is Om Namah Shivaya. So,
Yes,
you know, it's far more complex.
very much so.
You know,
I think let's try and... Go-
I'm speaking from a Gujarati perspective. I don't know what it's like in the south of India, but as a Gujarati Hindu, Christian book,
Hmm.
for us all of them are
Exactly. I think you're right. And I think what we're talking about now is, and I think we need to maybe tie the points up together that we've raised. I think for the vast majority of practicing Hindus, it's a sort of serial monotheism, if you like. I would almost use the word promiscuous monotheism, in as much as most Hindus are perfectly happy to worship Shiva at Shivratri, to worship Devi at Navaratri, and to worship Krishna at Janmashtami, and move freely and very easily between these different traditions. They'll go into the Shiva temple, into the Vishnu temple, into the Durga temple. In fact, as I'm going to come on to, they'll even go into the Jesus temple or the church. I was going to mention when I was on holiday in the Scilly Isles, there were a couple of elderly Hindus holidaying there in the same island, and I saw them one Sunday morning, and I said, where have you been today? And they said, we've been to church. And I said, I thought you said you were Hindus. And they said, yes, we're Hindus, but there's no temple on this island, so we just went to church instead. You do the Jesus temple, if you like, which I think is typical of the mass of believing Hindus. And I think that works well. But how does that actually work? Well, most would say, if you were to push them on it, well, I think Vishnu and Shiva are the same. There isn't any real distinction between them, that the one supreme God manifests himself or herself in many different ways. But ultimately, it's not that they're rival claims or anything like that. They are different manifestations, possibly even symbolic manifestations of the one unknowable supreme deity. So I think that on the popular level, that's the way Hinduism functions. At the Sampradaya level, however, I think there is a difference. So the acharyas of the sampradayas will tend to give a different version, such as the Swaminarayan Sampradaya or ISKCON Sampradaya, the South Indian Vaishnavas or the South Indian Shaivites. They will regard their deity, Shiva, Vishnu, Krishna, as the one supreme and other deities as being inferior to that. I was in a Shiva temple in South India, a very large one in Tirukallikundam. I had a long talk with some of the priests there. And he even went so far as to say, I don't regard myself primarily as a Hindu. I'm a Shaivite. First, I'm a Shaivite. Secondarily, I'm a Hindu. In the Vishnu temple down the road, he said, I sometimes go and visit my friends in the Shiva temple, because I went to school with them and that, and they invite me. But when I'm there and they're saying Om Namah Shivaya, in my mind I'm thinking Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I'm thinking of Vishnu all the time, because for me Vishnu is the only God. So I think at a sampradaya level there is a tendency to elevate one of the deities and regard the others as inferior. But in terms of the lived tradition that's practiced by Hindus, where theology doesn't matter that much, people move freely and easily and direct their devotion towards the divine manifest in either the form of Vishnu, either the form of Shiva, or else in the form of the goddess. And it really doesn't matter. Some may be drawn more towards one than another. So there's, I think, a dissonance there between the doctrine as it's taught in texts and by leaders of sampradayas and the way that the community as a whole interacts. Sorry, Krunal, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to say that one point is, even within the Advaita Sampradaya, we got the Bhagavad Sampradaya, and even within that there's a distinction of levels of superiority. Even there is where Krishna is worshipped at the top, and even Shiva then is subordinate, even in Advaita. We're looking at it from the Vaishnava point of view.
Okay, so there's sort of Vaishnava Advaita.
Yeah.
These things are never simple, are they? And I think what we see is that there is an incredible complexity. There's differences between the doctrine as it's established there. There's different ranges of doctrines and theologies. And then the lived tradition as it's practiced by Hindus. Again, enormous diversity of views. So go back to the original question, what do Hindus believe about God? They believe lots of different things about God, and they have their own ideas perhaps, and they have a form of spirituality that they pursue themselves. And I think that's why it's very, very difficult for outsiders to understand Hinduism, because the natural paradigm of what religion should be is that it should have a core set of texts and a core set of doctrines. I know I was doing that thing for you, actually, Shonak, on Monday night. I was in London at Imperial College, where I was fielding questions about Hinduism, and there was a Muslim colleague sitting next to me, and he just couldn't, he said, I just can't understand this. He says, you mean people have their own ideas, and they sort of choose what they believe? I said, well, you know, there's guidance there, but it's not rigidly dogmatically laid down what an individual must believe. And to go back to the point I was making, and we could explore this in much, much greater detail. We could look at Shaivism, we could look at Vaishnavism, we can look at Advaita, and all the different views about God that are advocated, and we could explore the subtleties of their thought. We could read Shankaracharya's Vedanta Sutra Bhasya if we had a few years to go through it, but sorry? Few lifetimes, okay, for fuller. And then you'll even find some people who'll say at the end of it, it really doesn't matter. Mirabai, great devotee of Krishna, heart full of divine love. I don't think she really ever studied philosophy or scripture or commentary, and probably if you'd asked her, don't you think it's time you hear Shankara's Bhasya? I don't think she would have really felt it necessary, because you say, what's the point of all this intellectual, mental wrangling? I just love Krishna. I just feel this intense love of Krishna, and that's enough for me. I don't need to philosophically tie it down. But what I think is, I do think it can be problematic. And I was talking before about young people within the tradition, when they're asked by their peers, what do you Hindus believe about this? What do you Hindus believe about that? And the questioner is expecting a quick, snappy answer. I believe this, that, points 1 to 4 in my creedal doctrine. There isn't a Hindu creed. And I think sometimes people feel, we're not a proper religion. We don't have a proper statement of doctrine in 4 easily digestible points that I can pass out on a card to someone. It's too complicated, it's too difficult, and therefore we're not such a good religion as the other ones. But I'm going to make the opposite point. I think the great glory and the great worthiness of Hinduism is that it's able to accommodate diversity and allow people with radically different views to get along, to interact, to worship, to practice their beliefs together, even though their ideas are extremely diverse. We don't have punch-ups between the Shaivites and the Vaishnavas. We don't have the Swaminarayans going down the Hare Krishna temple and beating them up as they come out. Interesting idea. I'd pay to see that. But it doesn't happen like that, because people can accept that, that people within one tradition have very different beliefs, and that's okay. There's no need. The fact that you don't believe the same as I do exactly doesn't mean that you're in any way an enemy or that I'm against you, or that I want to close you down, or I want to necessarily convert you at all. Hinduism doesn't work in that dogmatic way. Even Krishna, and I always seem to cite this verse, I don't know why, when I come here, at the end of the Gita, I think it's chapter 18, verse 63, he says, I've given you this gyan in detail. Now he says, Brimrishaita Asheshena. Think about it very carefully. Ashesha, with nothing left over. Think about everything I've said, and then Yatesh Jasita Takuru. Then you must do what you think is best, ultimately. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to impose upon you. The knowledge I've given you is not some kind of diktat that I demand that you accept now. I've given it you in the spirit of friendship. This is for your benefit. It's to help you. You take it, you use it, you incorporate it into your life. In other words, the teacher of religion is not a master, but rather he's a servant. He shows you different things. He offers you this. Here's Ram's story. Here's Mahabharata. Here's Upanishads. Take it, use it. It's for you. He's a servant. He's like the religion is like the librarian of spiritual resources, providing it for you, not imposing a dogma. And I think one of the great things about the Hindu religious tradition has been its ability to tolerate diversity. And that's not just internal tolerance, but it's external tolerance as well. For me, some of you know, I spend my winters, quite a bit of it, in South India, doing research and things like that. Not at all taking a winter holiday or anything like that. But one of the most moving experiences I've had in the whole of India is going to Cochin and seeing the Jewish synagogue there, built at a time when Jews were being persecuted all over the world. And they've got the plates there that the Maharaj of Cochin gave them, and when he put up the money for the building of that synagogue. And if you go to the Maharaj's palace, the man is a fanatic. He's a religious fanatic, a Hindu religious fanatic. His whole bedroom is decorated with a sort of cartoon version of the Ramayana, from the birth of Ram right round there. In his living room, he's got this big and very questionable, one has to say, image of Shiva and Shakti on the wall. He was clearly a man absolutely absorbed in Hinduism. But at the same time, when the Jews come, he doesn't say, you've got to be converted or persecuted. He says, can I offer you a bit of help building your synagogue? And I just thought that how wonderful that was in a time of medieval time when the Jews are being put in ghettos and things, how this man would just welcome them. Same with the Zoroastrians as well, when they came from Persia, accommodated, invited to stay. Christians from the early times as well, and Muslims as well when they first came, offered a place there. So this diversity inherently breeds tolerance. And again, I'm thinking back here to my old lecturer when I did my first degree at Birmingham University, Francis Young, who was a Christian minister herself, I remember her saying, we don't need simplistic creeds, we need wisdom. We need to develop wisdom that can't be just encapsulated into simple sound bites. So the Hindu faith doesn't deal in sound bites. It deals in complexity. It deals in depth of mystical realization. I'm going to finish now. I'm just going to read a short section from the Katha Upanishad, which again is the Kena Upanishad. I don't know if anybody's read the Kena Upanishad, but it's one of my favorite texts from within the Hindu tradition. I like it because, in particular, it starts off, I think, with a disciple approaching a guru. Now, a disciple coming to a guru, for the guru's point of view, can be very, very good because he's building up a group of followers. And but the guru doesn't offer him, he doesn't take that power position. First of all, the disciple asks him questions. And I'll read, this is the Advaita Ashram translation. Willed by whom does the directed mind go towards its object? Being directed by whom does the vital force precede all? By whom is this speech willed that people utter? Who is the effulgent being who directs the eyes and the ears? In other words, he's asking, I think the setting is the disciple studied all the Vedas, he's an expert priest, but he doesn't really understand the ultimate reality. So now he's coming to a guru and he's asking him. And by putting those questions to the guru, he's putting himself in a position of inferiority and he's inviting the guru to take a position of superiority, which for a human being is incredibly tempting. Everybody likes to be in a position of superiority. And everyone would like to be, well, maybe not everyone. Maybe I'm just speaking my own particular foibles and weaknesses. But it's very intoxicating. I remember when I was doing classes in Preston years ago, and one of the men who used to come sent up his little boy, and I was sitting at the front, and they put a flower garland around my neck, a few flower garland, touched my feet and everything like that. And yes, very amusing. And part of me was thinking, this is ridiculous, you know, just some bloke coming along and speaking of it. And another part of me was thinking, actually, this is pretty good. Maybe we should make this a regular thing. But anyway, but the guru doesn't do that. He says, na tatra chakshur gachchati na va gachchati no manaha. Na vidmo, na vidjanimo, yataitad anushishat. He says, the eye does not go there, nor speech, nor mind. We do not know Brahman to be this or to be that. Hence, we are not aware of any process of instructing about it. That's what he says. Na vidmo, na vidjanimo, Yataitad anushishat. It's beyond the range of the senses. It can't be heard, it can't be seen, it can't be conceptualized by the mind, and therefore I can't explain to you in words what it is like that you're asking about. Brahman, the ultimate reality, transcends doctrinal formulations. You can only know it through realization, and that realization is of such an exclusively spiritual nature that you won't be able to come back and tell us what it's like, because it goes beyond words. It's like, I suppose, trying to tell a blind person what blue is like. Unless you've had that experiential realization of the nature of the divine, then it can't be communicated in any other way. And I think, again, that's what the Upanishad's saying, and that's what the Hindu tradition generally as a whole is saying, that you can't reduce the absolute, the divine, God, to simple creedal formulae. Rather, it will provide you with the tools and the means by which you can gain experiential knowledge, realize knowledge of that absolute truth. And at that point, words are no longer required to speak of it. So I suppose in a sense that's a rather disappointing answer, isn't it, that we've come to that point of saying we can't really define it because it's beyond definition. But I didn't say that. I was just then quoting the Kena Upanishad. And I think that's right. That's the way it should be. If the absolute truth could be reduced to simple statements of it is like this, it is like that, it is like this, then it would no longer be the absolute truth. It would be a relative truth contained within words and within mind. So ultimately, the transcendence of God is so absolute that there is no way in which a mere speaker such as myself can explain anything about it in this short talk.